have the right, they have the right to refuse any of those things. Um, and residents are citizens and retain all the rights that um, we enjoy as Americans. Next slide, please. Rights in long-term care communities, every resident shall have the following rights. So we're going to go through a few of these. Thank you, Kim. Um, to be treated with respect, consideration, dignity, and full recognition of his or her individuality and right to privacy. Um, we talk about this to every resident, every staff member, every administrator, every person we come across. Um, we understand, for example, that there is a staff shortage. We understand that, and it's very difficult to work around. However, they still have people who live in those facilities, and that is their home, and they still need the care that they're supposed to be getting. And they should be treated with respect, not talking about them outside their room or labeling them the whiner or the difficult one or anything like that. Um, and they have the right to be who they are. We don't have a right to tell anyone, but especially someone in long-term care, who they have to conform to be in order to be there. The next slide. They have the right to receive care and services which are adequate, appropriate, and in compliance with relevant federal and state laws and rules and regulations. Um, that's and again, though, they have the right to receive these services. However, they also have the right to refuse those services. Um, it's hard for staff and families sometimes to understand that even if we don't agree with the decision that the person is making, they have the right to make that decision, whether it's not to take medication anymore or therapy or be on dialysis or anything like that. Next slide. Um, to receive upon admission and during his or her stay, a written statement of services provided by the facility and charges for these facilities. If anything changes, residents and families need to know in writing that a new service is being provided and the cost, or if the cost is changing, or as during the pandemic when they were no longer they were unable to provide the beauty shop for residents. They have to receive that in writing and know if they're being charged or not and how much they're being charged. And Rochelle, I think I'm taking over your time and I'm so sorry. So I'm going to hand this over to Rochelle as she continues on and I stop. You can hear somebody else's voice now. Sorry, Rochelle.
It is quite all right, Corey. I get very passionate about resident rights as well, so I definitely understand. So, as Corey was stating earlier, we are talking about the rights of our individuals in long-term care communities. So, one of those rights is to be free from mental, physical abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So, let's just kind of unpack that a little bit. So, again, a lot of this is self-explanatory. Mental and physical abuse that could look like, any kind of name calling, bullying, anything that is improper use of derogatory terminology, anything that will make that individual feel excluded or discriminated against. We want to make sure that those things are not occurring, within the community, because they do happen. Neglect is something that, as an ombudsman, we do get those calls a lot, regarding services that individuals are not receiving, or them feeling that they are being neglected, in regards to, it could be something as simple as receiving a shower or being able to participate in activities, those kind of things that can definitely fall under neglect. Exploitation, I focus a lot on this, especially with staff. You may have a resident who is very fond of one particular staff and want to give them gifts and presents and things like that. But again, that's a very fine line, because then you can look as though that you're exploiting that individual, even though they may have the best intention, to just love on you, appreciate you, all those different things. But you definitely want to make sure that um, that you're cognizant of that, and that you are not seen as being, someone who's taken advantage of an individual's kindness, because of that. We do see a lot of financial exploitation, which is something that we can address. However, if we feel that it is out of our scope, then that would be something we would refer to APS, because someone would need to investigate that. So we can initiate something, but we don't necessarily do the actual investigation when it comes to financial exploitation. But exploitation is something that can happen, and before you know it, you're caught up. That's the terminology I like to use, especially with staff. You get caught up and you're doing something that really you should not be doing. So again, there's no excuse for elder abuse. Thank you. Next slide. Except in emergencies, to be free from chemical and physical restraints unless authorized for a specific period of time by a physician according to clear and indicated medical need. Okay, this is another one we need to unpack. We cannot, under no circumstances, use chemical restraints. Chemical restraints are yeah. So and again, I have a very extensive mental health background, as you were told earlier. So chemical restraints are prevalent in long-term care facilities or communities, because they use them as a way to control behaviors. And they use that word or that terminology a lot, and not really understanding the individual and tailoring a care plan that will support when they are going through a challenge, or a mental health challenge, or a mental health, situation. So chemical restraints have become the norm, with giving medications that are not appropriate, or the dosage is too strong. And then you have individuals that are, pretty much non-responsive, and they're not able to engage in a manner that is conducive to what they need to do. However, if there is an acute situation, then yes, you may, the facility or the community may, or the physician may prescribe something. However, there needs to be a specific period of time when that medication is discontinued. This should not be something that is continuous. Okay, because again, it will it will look like it's a chemical restraint. Okay, physical restraints, that's a no-no. That is absolutely a no-no. We have seen that in some of our communities, where an individual may be tied to a chair, or restrained with a gate belt, or there may be a there may be a table that's in front of them that's restricting the movement of their wheelchair, or their wheelchair is locked, which prevents them from being able to move freely about their community. So at the end of the day, this is still their home. They still should be able to have the freedom. It is the responsibility of the staff and the administration to ensure that that resident is safe if there's a concern, if there's a risk. But to lock their wheelchair and walk away and they don't have the means to unlock that wheelchair, that can be considered a restraint. Okay. So that's a definitely a no-no. Next slide, please. To have his or her personal and medical records kept confidential and not disclosed without written consent of the individual or guardian. Consent shall specify to whom disclosure may be made, except as required by applicable state or federal statute or regulation or by third party contract. So basically, you have to get their permission. You cannot share. If they have the ability to give that permission, you have to be able to ask them for that permission. You cannot just have someone call in and say, hey, can I get that medical record for, Mr. Brown? No, if Mr. Brown does not have you on a written consent to say it's okay, then no, you cannot share that information, first of all. Second of all, you cannot even identify if Mr. Brown is in that particular community if you are not on his list of people to give that information to. So we have to be really cognizant of that. And even with staff, when I do training, you may have a friend or family member or someone who comes in and visits an individual frequently, and you just start telling them how they're doing. Oh, they're doing great. They did this today. They did that today. No, that's a HIPAA violation. If you have not gotten their consent, you still need to ask them first, is it okay for me to share this information with this loved one or this friend that's coming in? And again, it's about giving them that autonomy to be able to make decisions on their own and not assuming that they can't. Next slide, please. To receive a reasonable response to his or her request from the facility administrator and staff. And Corey can basically, support me in this conversation. We have had individuals or family members, it could be their POA, it could be someone who is their responsible party trying to get, information from the facility or the community, and administration does not respond, or administration drags their feet, or there's a whole bunch of reasons, and we can list a bunch of reasons why administration will not provide that information. Again, it is their right. If the individual says it's okay and we have it documented, then it's okay. If I ask you for a copy of my MAR, it is my MAR. I can get a copy of my MAR. And those who do not know what a MAR is, that's their medication administration record. This is a listing of all of their medications that they take. It should have a begin date, an end date. So it should be very intentional about their care. So if I ask for that, then yes, I have a right to that. If I have that ability to get it, I do have a right to do that. So this is a complaint that we do see a lot regarding individuals not being able to have access to their own personal documentation. Next slide, please. All right. To associate and communicate privately and without restriction with people and groups of his or her own choice, on his or her own, on his or her own or their initiative at any reasonable hour. So, again, let's unpack this. If an individual wants to use the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning, that individual has the right to use the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. I have staff who will tell me, oh, they're always wanting to use the phone at, 6 o'clock. Okay, well, don't you have staff at 6 o'clock? So if you're not doing anything at that time, it is up for you to facilitate that conversation for that individual at 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so we definitely want to make sure that they have the right. Again, this is their home. So if you were home, would you be able to pick up your phone and call whomever you needed to at midnight or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. Yes, it can get a little overwhelming. That's why you have a conversation. So you can pick times and you document those times that they are able to use the phone. However, we cannot restrict people from being able to communicate and to associate with individuals that they choose appropriate. Okay. If there is a risk, that needs to be a conversation. There needs to be a clinical team that comes together with that individual to make that decision. Okay. But at the end of the day, that person, that individual has a right to communicate with whomever they choose. Okay. Next slide, please. Yes, to have access, and I just said this, to have access to reasonable hour to a telephone, or he or she may speak privately. Now, I have an extensive background like Corey does when it comes to long-term care. So different communities do this differently. Some communities have telephone rooms, some communities have telephones in their room, some communities have a designated station at the nurse's station where individuals can use the telephone. The bottom line is there needs to be something where this person can communicate privately. Okay. However, that looks like for that community. So if it's at the nurse's station, then the nurse should excuse themselves. If the individual says it's okay for that nurse to remain while they're on the phone, then that's okay. Okay, but we need to make sure that we are making every effort to provide an area that is private. A lot of our individuals have cell phones, so some of this does not come into play now, but years ago, when there was not a lot of cell phones going on, there need to be something that is conducive to them to be able to talk on the telephone. Next slide, please. I love this. I love this picture. Okay, to send and receive mail promptly and unopened. Okay, do not open their mail. Do not open their mail. Not unless you ask them. Now, if they ask you to read their mail to them, it's okay. It is totally okay. They've given you permission, it's okay. But you cannot read their mail, you cannot open their packages, you cannot do any of those things unless there's a risk, but you still have to ask them. You cannot stand in front of Mr. Brown and just start opening up his Amazon package, okay? There should be something documented that say it's okay. Or again, like I said, if there's a risk, but there still should be some documentation to show this is the reason, and there still should be some documentation to say that we have discussed this with Mr. Brown and he's aware, okay, that we will be opening certain packages because there's a risk, okay, and to have access to her expense, to writing instruments, stationery, and postage. When I was a social services director, going to, I had individuals that would come to me, ask me for paper, ask me for envelopes. I mean, we didn't do stamps. We had a postage, we had the postage machine, which was great, but we should be able to provide those things to them so they can write correspondence to their families, those kind of things.
Rochelle,
Yes, ma'am.
let's take a quick break and let people ask questions. And I have one to kind of give us a moment too, if you don't mind.
Yes.
The last one you were on, which is I think a good one, I know is an ombudsman. I know the answer to this, but I still want to ask because I think it's important people realize that the opening mail thing is so tricky, right? So I've had, them say, in fact, this happened recently. We're opening her mail because we know she's getting illegal things. She's getting medicine mailed to her, or in this case, edibles mailed to her. So we're opening mail because they can't have that, and we can't have them having that. So we're um, interfering with their mail because we know they're doing the wrong thing. Or we're the rep payee, so we have to know what bills they need to pay. So why can't we open their mail? I mean, this is a clear violation of our policy, so why would we not be able to open their mail?
Corey, do you wanna start?
You can go ahead.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's a couple of issues there. So one, we do know, again, like we said, if we understand that there is a risk, my first question would be, have we discussed that risk with the individual? Have we discussed it? Have we identified the risk? Have we identified the concerns? Have we noted that somewhere on their care plan? If they do have family, if they don't have a POA or a guardian or someone of that nature, have we had that discussion with them? Has nursing talked to them about their pros and cons of taking this medication without us knowing and those kind of things? So there's some things that we can do prior, but you will have some individuals that will say, hey, I don't want, you still can't open it. You can't do this. You can't do that. And again, I get it. So then it would be a combination of the risk to the patient and the need for us to be able to communicate with that individual appropriately so we can get them to understand, so we can kind of come to a middle ground of what we can and cannot do. Okay, it gets very tricky, especially if they're taking medication or taking something that we know that is contraindicated to their care. Okay, that's where that risk comes in, but it has to be really documented that there is a risk for you to say, I am going to open up this, or I'm going to be present when you're opening up this particular package or this mail. One of the things that communities fail to do, they fail to document appropriately that they've had those conversations, that they've done those different interventions, that they've had those meetings with family and things like that, with the individual, okay, to get them to understand. They just take it upon themselves to make that decision, which is totally against their rights. And that's what we're trying to, get facilities and communities to understand. It's not the fact that there's a concern, it's the fact of how you're dealing with the concern, which violates their rights. So, Corey,
Awesome.
did you want to say something else to
I,
that?
I'm a big um pusher of the documentation, contracts between people, or anything like that. And I've had people who it was a risk for them to open packages, and because they were receiving things that they should not have been receiving. And they had a care plan meeting. We had it documented. We then, anytime they got a package in the mail, um, that documentation was brought to his room, reviewed again, reviewed for the signature, and signed again. And it seems like it's too much, but it's for something like opening mail and receiving things that are private for us. Sometimes it has to be done, and documentation is one of those things that I started in healthcare when if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Right.
So I document every little thing that happens, and then review again with the resident. Well, this is what could happen if you take these with this medication. Do you understand that? And go into it like that. But like you had said, documentation is probably, and a full conversation of the pros and cons of what taking a medication or getting um, certain items in the mail that are unsafe, um, how that can affect um, their living arrangement. And there usually is something in the um, when they move in that
The
says
living agreement.
what they can have, what they can't have, what's illegal, or anything like that that they have signed. And if that's signed, that's one of the first things I ask for as well. Is was something said at admission that this may happen, and are they aware?
I have one more question related to mailing and having the right to pen and paper, and then we can maybe move on. So the person asks if a facility has a postage machine, is the resident have the right to use the machine? Or do they have to provide their own postage stamps? I guess going along with the pen and paper thing has to do with having the ability, right, to it's pointed at the fact that residents still have the right to mail. Now, granted, in 2024, this probably is a little less relevant, right? Um, Due to the electronic mail thing. But if someone wanted to say, mail an absentee ballot, mail a birthday card, does the facility give them the ability to also access postage, right? Because pen and paper only get you halfway.
Right. So, to answer your question, Crystal, most of the facilities that I worked in, they do also have an electronic, postage machine. So normally it was either given to the social worker. If it wasn't the social worker, it was the activity director. There should be some system that's in place. It could be the business office manager. There still should be a system in place give for them to give their mail, to have it stamped so it can go out in the outgoing mail. So it still should be a system. Again, I'm big on encouraging empowerment. So if that is not indicated, or if they do not know, then they really need to be asking. I need to be able to do this. What is your system, to be able to mail letters and postcards and things like that? So.
And as far as the cost is, I mean, I think it's a facility thing. Some facilities may say they're not going to charge you, especially if it's like a medical bill. But I think it's really up to the individual facility if they're also going to add the charges for the stamping onto your bill, how strict they are. But anyway, great question.
And stuff like that should be in the admissions packet. So always go back to the admission packet. The admission packet should be very clear about, extra services. It could be postage, it could be whatever. All of that needs to be included in that admission packet.
So, all right, Michelle, you want to move on and we'll take some more at the end then. I thought that would be a little good break. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. All righty. To be encouraged to exercise his or her rights as a resident and citizen, and to be permitted to make complaints and suggestions without fear of coercion or retaliation. Some of our individuals are fearful, and let's just be honest, they are fearful sometimes to call us and make complaints because they do feel that will be some type of retaliation because they have called the ombudsman. When we do our education, and I know Corey, when she does her education at her communities, I always make it very clear. My goal is to assist. My goal is to mediate. My goal is to empower. So not only the individual, but also educate the staff and the administration, again, to say they do have a right to complain. Everybody has a right to complain. It is up to us to figure out why they're complaining. What can we do to assist them? And if this is an ongoing complaint, maybe there is a root cause or underlying factor that we have not considered or found that's a cause of the complaint. It could be something totally not related to the food. They could have had a bad day with a family member, but the only thing they have in their control is the fact that the fish sticks were cold, or I get bread too much, or I get this too much. So sometimes it just takes a moment for us to be able to have that conversation with them to figure out whatever that root cause is. However, that is a common concern for some of our individuals, that there will be some type of retaliation, but they are free. We should not be doing that. We are here to help, and that's what we should be doing. We should be doing that. Next slide, please. To have and use his or her own possessions where reasonable, and have an accessible, lockable space provided for security of personal valuables. This space shall be accessible only to the resident, administrator, and supervisor in charge. Everyone should not have access to their possessions. Okay. We should be making sure that this is their space. They have the right to, you know, make their space as comfortable as they possibly can because this is their home. But we do want to make sure that there is a space somewhere if we're concerned about valuables, things of that nature, that they have access to. We're explaining why we're putting valuables in a particular location. And we need to be able to give them that key or that code to be able to access those items. And again, there should be a discussion. If there's certain times of the day that they can access that, that needs to be a discussion. And if there's a particular person that assists them with that, that should also be a discussion as well, who will actually assist them to get their items. But they should be able to have a secure location for their items. Next slide, please. To manage his or own personal needs fund. Oh, this is a good one. Yes, we have a lot of this, don't we, Corey? To manage his or her personal needs funds unless such authority has been delegated to another. Okay, so let's unpack that first sentence. If they have the ability, okay, if they have the ability to manage their funds, they have not been deemed incompetent, they've shown that they can handle their own funding, then they have a right to do that. They have a right to pay their bills. They have a right to receive a bill if you do give out bills, okay? So you definitely want to make sure that we are giving them that autonomy. It's about autonomy. I want to be able to do that for myself. I still have the ability. Okay. If the if the community is the resident payee, regardless, they still should be having conversations with them regarding of how their money is being distributed. Okay. Just because you become their red payee does not mean you don't have a conversation. If they come to your office and ask you, hey, what did you pay for this month? Or where did my funding go to this month? It's okay for you to tell them that, even if they don't handle it themselves. You need to be able to share that. Okay. If authority to manage personal needs funds have been delegated to the facility, the resident has the right to examine the account at any time. Just like you call your bank and you look at your bank account, it's the same difference. They have the right to ask, okay, can I get a statement? Can I see exactly where my money is going? Okay. And they do have that right. Do not take their rights away. If they have the ability to do it, this is what helps them to cope. This is what helps them to feel as though they still have some type of control of what's going on in their life. Okay. When so many things are out of their control, this does give them some type of control. Next slide, please. Now, we have had a couple of our communities that have, either closed or, certain things have happened. So this right here basically says that they have a right to know. Okay, they have a right to know if there has been any kind of provisional licenses issued or any kind of revocation. If a community is going under survey and the survey has cited them, and there's a potential of them losing their license. Families and residents should know, not just the families, but the resident as well. Okay, because the resident is going to have some anxiety about this. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to stay? Who's going to support me? And a lot of times we focus all of our conversations on the family, okay, but we're not including the individual because they're the ones that have the most anxiety. The families have anxiety as well, but the resident who's been there for 5, 6, 7 years, this is their only home that they know. These are the only people that they know. There's going to be some more anxiety there with that. So we want to make sure that we are having those conversations with them. Okay. I keep hearing that. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop real quick, Crystal. I've seen a couple of people pop up saying that they're having difficulties hearing. Is everybody able to hear me?
I can hear you fine, but I don't know if maybe you got a little further away from the microphone at one point, or
Okay.
so. Yeah, a lot of people Maybe give us a thumbs up if you can hear okay. If I get a significant number of thumbs up, I know we can
Sounds
keep
great to
going.
me.
All right, we got some thumbs up.
Okay, there's the volume drops when
Okay.
there. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I saw a couple of things pop up. I just want to make sure everybody could hear me easily.
I think
Okay,
we're good.
okay,
Keep
perfect.
on moving.
All righty, perfect. Thank you. Next slide, please. To have freedom to participate by choice in accessible community activities and in social, political, medical, and religious resources, and to have freedom to refuse such participation. So this is a pet peeve of mine. So I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but it is a pet peeve of mine. So when we're talking about activities, we're talking about activities that are related to the population that we're serving. Okay. One of the pet peeves that I have is that when I go into long-term care communities, at times that, they may have out of a 30-day calendar, you may have 20 days of bingo. Yeah, no. No, I know people like bingo. I love bingo myself. I used to be a diehard bingo fan years ago. However, there should be something else that is conducive or supporting their cognition, their physical, their spiritual, their emotional, whatever it is. There should be a variety of things that is on that calendar. I've always supported individualized calendars. I've always supported individualized activities, even supporting a resident choice activity where the residents have gotten together either through resident council or those things to say these are the activities that we want, and we choose to have these activities on certain days. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are doing those things to give them that sense that if they were home, these are the things that I would want to do. And if I do not want to do gardening, do not take me to go to garden. I personally, if for whatever reason, if I ever go into a supportive community or an assisted living, do not send me to gardening. I do not do dirt. I will not participate. I will not do any of those things because that's just not my calling. Now, somebody else would, if you would take me to music or arts and crafts, things like that, I am 100%. But sometimes we force our individuals to do things and then we question why they don't participate. Or we say in their care plan, failure to participate, do not participate. But those things that you like to do, I want you to do those things because again, this is what keeps you happy. This is your wellness, right? So this is what keeps you happy. Let's do those things that keep you happy. So whatever that looks like, that's what we need to do. Okay. Medical, if they have their own physician. Now, sometimes with long-term care, especially in skilled nursing, that might not be an option. But for me, who covers adult care homes, they still have the option of using their PCP or their podiatrist or a doctor that they have been already linked with in the community. So it's okay for them to do that. It needs to have a conversation. Who's going to do what? How are we going to get this information? How are we going to collaborate as a team to get this information done? Okay. And again, they have a right to refuse. They have a right to refuse. So we just want to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to spend too much time. This is what we were talking about before to receive upon admission to the facility a copy of this section. So there are posters that are listed that talk about resident rights. As ombudsmen, we give out flyers, we give out pamphlets, we give out everything related to resident rights. So if a resident says that they do not know, that's the first thing I'm giving them is a pamphlet or a flyer or a brochure that lets them know about their rights. Some communities, I cannot say all, but some communities have started putting resident rights information into their admission packet. So it really just depends. If they don't do that, then there's always a poster that is listed, and it has to be visible. It has to be visible. They should be able to physically go to that poster and know what their rights are. Okay, so they should be able to have access to that. Next slide. Not to be transferred or discharged from a facility except for medical reasons, the resident's own or other resident's welfare, non-payment for the stay, or when the transfer is mandated under state or federal law. You cannot discharge from someone from a facility because you don't like them. You cannot. You cannot. We have heard so many different tales, and every ombudsman that is on this call today will probably have their own horror story where administrators or facilities or communities have given us discharge notices, and the discharge notice makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. There is no basis, there's no documentation, there's nothing to support this discharge. So again, these are the criteria. This is the criteria. If it's out of those lines of that criteria, then we really need to have a conversation, because this is what they need to be looking at when it comes to discharging someone from a community. Now, except in cases of immediate jeopardy. And what do we consider immediate jeopardy? To health or safety, residents shall be given at least 30 days advance notice of the transfer or discharge and their right to appeal. Okay. So again, even if it's immediate, they still have a right to appeal. There is 2 pages that the resident should get, and their responsible party, POA, guardian, whomever, should get. Okay. If they do not have those 2 pieces of paper, then that discharge is not valid. We need to do it again. We need to start over. Okay. So we want to make sure that's in place. Next slide, please. So those who have been with us for the webinar series, we really got some really good information regarding guardianship. Okay. I think guardianship, power of attorney is really one of those subjects that really needs to have a little bit more discussion. And I know we have links and things like that to give you guys to send out, just to make sure that, we are keeping that at the forefront. A lot of times when you become a guardian or someone becomes a guardian, they feel like they are the end all, the be all, and all of the rights to that individual is taken away. That is not correct. Okay. If that person still has capacity, they still have rights. Okay. We need to respect that. We need to make sure that we're having conversations that include them. Guardianship is intrusive because it can be the most it is the most restrictive form. Okay. It is the most restrictive form. When you're thinking about, what can and can be done, we don't always go to guardianship because that is the most restrictive. We want to make sure that we are doing things that still gives that individual some type of autonomy. Okay. So we look at limited guardianship. So the individual is able to retain some control. We know that they may not retain all control, but we want to have them to feel like they're being productive and they do have some control over their lives. Next slide, please. At the end of the day, our individuals still have a voice. They still have a voice. Supportive decision making is a tool that allows people with disabilities to retain their decision making capacity by choosing supporters to help them make choices. Choosing. That is the key word. They have that ability to choose. If I want my cousin to be my supportive decision making representative, then I have that right. I don't necessarily I may not want my son to do it or my daughter to do it or whomever. There may be someone that I trust even more to make those decisions for me. So I should be able to designate who that person should be and not just have this assumption that it's always going to be a family member. And let's just be honest, some family are messy. We deal with a lot of family dynamics. So sometimes the family may not be the best person to handle issues when it comes to our individuals. So a person using supportive decision making selects trusted advisors such as friends, family, or members or professionals to serve as supporters. Okay, great. And a lot of this information, like I said before, you guys will get. I know this recording will be sent out, and there has been some links sent out if you guys want any further information regarding guardianship, power of attorney, or supportive decision making. Okay. Next slide. I think that may end our slide. Thank you for providing our aging population with dignity and respect. So we do appreciate you guys for all the work that you do. Keep doing it. It is difficult. However, there is a purpose and a plan for everything that we do. So we appreciate you very much.
Thanks,
Take it away,
Rochelle.
Miss Crystal. No problem.
All right, everybody, now's the time to ask all of your questions. I'll start off because that hopefully stirs the pot a little bit to help some. I'm going back to the question about retaliation. In a lot of situations, people are concerned about retaliation, even if it's just a perception and not necessarily a reality. Um, what do ombudsmen do if someone feels like their rights are being violated, but they want to make an anonymous complaint, either as an outside person, like an agency or a friend, and decide that they want an anonymity. Am I saying that right? Anonymity. And how does that handled? Corey, Rochelle?
Sure. Um, if and if I'm not answering the question correctly, Crystal, tell me I took a wrong turn. Um, when I am speaking to a resident about an issue that they are going through, and as we talked about with consent, we always ask, you know, do I have consent to speak to um, staff about this issue, or the administrator, or whoever I would need to go to? Um, when they tell us or tell me that they have a fear of retaliation, um, I will always let them know that retaliation should not happen. Retaliation is against the law. However, we can't promise that it will not happen. And I will let them think about it. If you want to think about whether or not you want me to bring this up, go right ahead. If in an hour you decide, you know what, I want this handled, I will be happy to. If there's only certain staff you want me to speak to, I will only speak to those staff members to make it as comfortable for that person. If that person tells me, absolutely not, I don't want my name used, but this is the issue that's occurring, I will go to other residents as I'm doing my visits and ask questions about, how is third shift? Um, you know, any issues, or work around it without outright saying, so I heard there are issues on third shift, so tell me all about it. But to get other people corroborating it.
Rating, yes.
Thank you. So that way I can use it as a facility complaint. So
Right.
it's not linked to one person, it's linked to several different people. And when we do visits, we visit several different people, so nobody knows who's talking to us or who had an appointment or what the case may be. And do it that way. That way, no one is singled out and no one is, or we hope no one is retaliated against. And when staff says, oh, you're talking about Miss Jones, you mean Miss Jones, because Miss Jones always talks about that. So you're talking about Miss Jones. We just say we spoke to residents.
Uh,
We don't give names, they naturally want to know who is saying things, but we just don't
Close.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We
I
just don't
got you.
disclose that information. I appreciate it. Disclose that type of information.
Right.
Did I answer the question or did I go off in a tangent
No, I think
altogether?
that's a reasonable response. I was just trying to think about people who are watching this webinar that may be CAC volunteers or other. Of course, it's going to ring. There's going to be people who are maybe involved in the aging world and have a complaint, but they don't really want to be tied to it. I just want them to make sure that like they understand where our role falls into it, like where you can make
Absolutely.
a complaint, but the
It
consent of
will,
the resident and the specific situations where I want to make sure they understand what happens in that situation
yes.
too,
And things
especially
are
for
always
residents.
anonymous until we have consent. So if, as ombudsman, we have staff members who call us, and they don't want their names used, and that's absolutely fine. But we take what information we're given, and dinner time, they're waiting till 7 o'clock to even bring meals out to the hallway. That way, we can go out at that time and know what to look for, and never use anybody's name. We just show up. We don't tell anybody when we're coming normally for a visit. So if it's anonymous, we keep it that is anonymous. We can't always say they're not going to try and figure it out, but from us, that won't be provided
Yeah.
or disclosed.
Yeah, Corey is absolutely right. For us, our mandates are very clear. We have to have that consent from them, and we do explain to them thoroughly that we would have to, they would have to give us permission to disclose, that information to if it's administration, if it's to dietary, if it's to whomever, we have to. But again, it's about that consent. But I agree with Corey 100%. After I'm, talking with other individuals, if I see a trend, then I can go back and open up the complaint, as a facility complaint, and I would just open it up as myself. And I would, do whatever investigation I need to do at that point. And then at that point, I'm not even using anything that the resident has told me. I'm using it as a basis, but I'm like, hey, this is a trend. I have seen this trend, and we need to address this trend. How are we addressing this trend? So yeah, we can definitely try to address it behind, but we have to make sure that the resident understands, and that's when we discuss that consent portion. Yes, ma'am.
One person said sometimes residents will tell them that they've lived there a long time and they don't really have anywhere else to go. Probably they feel like there's nowhere else to go due to their financial or behavioral issues, what have you. And they're scared, so you wonder what they're being told. So like what would make residents fearful, and how do we get around that, or can we?
And this is sort of a side answer, but one thing
I
in
like
our
that.
region that we've noticed is, especially in like the family care homes that are so much smaller,
Mm.
and you can hear a pin drop, in one room when you're 3 rooms down because everything is just so close together, um, that we have added our email address to posters, because for some people that makes them feel like it's more secure. That way we're not coming out. So they, someone sees us talking to them or hears them on the phone, but they can get our email address and email us directly and have a conversation that way. And that helps in some cases. But there are some facilities where we do absolutely wonder, what are you being told is going to happen if you share information with us? And
Mhm.
that's probably something that keeps all ombudsmen awake,
Yeah, that's
without a
so
doubt.
true.
Mhm.
One of the things I feel like a lot of people say is, I'm afraid they're going to kick us out. And I'll try to tell them, they have a discharge process. And yes, I've
Yes.
heard a million times administrators say, well, if you're not happy here, we can't, what
Oh,
is it they say? If we can't we can no longer, we feel like we can no longer meet your loved one's needs, right? And I tell you, it's an insinuation, but
Yes,
technically, legally, they cannot kick you out.
right.
So that sometimes is a form of retaliation. I think a backwards way of retaliation. And we, like you said, you can't always get that happen. But I try to tell people a lot of what we do, we try not to pinpoint any one person or thing. It's like we try to take it from how do we make everyone play nice in the sandbox.
Right.
Rochelle,
Absolutely.
you have something to add?
Um, It's very difficult. Again, it's very difficult. Retaliation is real. Bullying is real. We're dealing with people that have so many different personalities. Just because they've come into a long-term care facility, it doesn't mean that their personality is going to be all rainbows and sunshine. And it probably will be worse. So if they have a poor attitude at home, then they probably will have a poor attitude, in the long-term care facility. So, again, having those conversations with them. For me, I think the biggest thing is education. I see myself as not only an advocate for the individual, but also for the community as well. So I'm constantly educating them on best practices, what that looks like. If someone has mental health challenges, like Crystal was saying, are we actually addressing those things? If you're saying that you're having issues or challenges with this individual, what have you done to address it? Because it could be something that's as simple as referring someone to talk therapy or just getting a volunteer to come in. There's a lot of different resources that are out there that people haven't taken time to tap in that don't really cost any money. And then that individual maybe just needs someone to talk to, not necessarily saying that they're bad people or they're mean people, all those words that we hear. Oh, he's so mean, he's so nasty, he's so this, she's so this. But sometimes they just need someone to talk to and be able to process their feelings with. And we don't do that very often. And we don't get to know our individuals, unfortunately, the best way we can. So we can help them to move into a different space. So if there can be a little bit more education, especially with the administration and the staff and what that looks like, this could be your loved one, this could be your dad, this could be your mom, this could be your grandmother. How would you feel if someone treated your loved one the way that you're talking to them or speaking with them? I'm very straightforward. So I just like to give them that reality. We have to be mindful of that.
Thank you, ladies. Are there any other questions from the participants? I'm going to give you this opportunity to ask your questions about residents' rights, about the ombudsman program, guardianship, any of that. If not, I will give you
Crystal,
back the, yes, Corey.
I'm so sorry. And you're just about to give them time. And they were like, yes. And then
And
I'm that
Corey's like,
student.
no.
Yes. And then I'm that student in the back is like, Ms. Norman, you didn't give us homework for tonight. And I'm so sorry. But if I could explain one thing, because one of my pet peeves is people talking about residents in front of them, outside their door, yelling across the hallway about them. It drives me crazy.
It's bullying.
It's and just to show how quickly it can happen, um, 2 years ago now, I guess, I went to a migraine clinic in Michigan, and I was in the hospital there for 2 weeks, and everything was fine. There were no problems. I had learned that I was iron deficient, so someone was coming up to speak with me. And I said that was fine, no problem. But the gentleman didn't knock on my door when he came in, put the hand sanitizer on and said, are you Corey?
I'm not hearing
And
well.
I just, being me, for those who know me on the on here, said,
Uh-huh.
oh, who are you? And he said, well, I'll tell you when I get closer. And I said, no, sir. Um, can you'll tell me from right there who you're with. And that's when he sighed very loudly and said he was from, to talk to me about being iron deficient. And I was like, oh, absolutely. And he came over. I was in a room by myself. And because we're in a migraine clinic, many of us who were there have triggers, and one of mine is smells. And when nurses or aides came in to assist, they would put the hand sanitizer on and then put the gloves on. So I never actually smelled the hand sanitizer before. And as he came closer, my pain increased. And I said, I am so sorry. Can you put the paperwork on the bed and maybe sit on that bed? Because the smell of the hand sanitizer is really strong, but I really want to talk to you about this. He threw the papers on the bed, said that I was ridiculous, and left. I was pretty much labeled after that as being difficult. I either had people say, Corey, why were you so difficult with that guy? He said that you were just so mean. Like but he walked into my room and he didn't knock. And and then, or someone would help me to have a test done and they'd say, you're not as mean as they said you were. Well, no, I just wanted to be treated respectfully. And that's how quickly it can happen over a misunderstanding, and then the resident gets labeled, and then they are forever labeled. So if they are a troublemaker, if they want to switch facilities, they are still labeled the troublemaker or the whiner or the one who's always hitting their call bell or anything like that.
It
And that's
reduced.
something that happens very quickly, and I think is just so very unfair to our residents who just simply either want some assistance or need someone to talk to, or really anything. And it just happens way too quickly that because they're older, people tend to write them off very easily.
They get reduced to a one personality set,
Yes.
one personality trait
Yes,
that could have been really truly a moment in time.
exactly.
Time.
Exactly. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that, and now you can give people their time back. I'm done.
You're welcome. I mean, then that's why I feel like as ombudsman, when we're doing these residents' rights, it's like kind of going back to the resident right piece and making sure they're being honored and not just, well, they don't get that right. I think an administrator told me last week, well, the other residents get that right and they don't because they're this, this, and that. And I'm like, that's not how residents' rights work. They are the rights for every single one of your residents. And you don't get to pick and choose because you don't like how they exercise their rights. So I appreciate you sharing that, Corey. And that's an important part of what we do is just helping to dispel some of that, that type of ostracization or whatever you want to call it, ostracizing from the staff. So, and I appreciate you guys today, Rochelle and Corey. Thank you for your knowledge and your expertise in speaking today. Again, this webinar is the last of our 3-part series. We will work hard at bringing you some great topics maybe next fall. If you have suggestions, share that with your ombudsman. Otherwise, this recording will come up through YouTube and we will share that through the association soon. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you, everyone.